All right.
Check.
So, how's it going? I
Good.
I just drove 12 hours from Kentucky seeing Mike. So, I'm a little
Gross.
bit tired.
But see, that makes you more snarky, so this could be a fun episode.
Well, the whole topic of this episode is meant to be at least a little bit snarky.
Well, to what episode is this?
This
Four?
is 4. Yes.
All right. Welcome to episode 4. For those of you that have the video, you could see me hold up my fingers. I know how to count.
For those of you that don't have the video, he held up 3 fingers.
Shut
So
up. I'm an engineer.
I'm good with
I'm good at
numbers.
math. Yeah. So I guess we should do like the premise of this, right? So the premise of this episode, before we get into the actual subject, is sometimes people tell stories, and those stories get embellished, or facts get twisted or moved, and that's why Nephi needed scriptures in the Promised Land because things just get weird real quick, and
It's easy
so
to misremember things.
yeah, and like things just we put our own spin on things, and that's why two witnesses is always helpful because one can call the other and say BS. So,
Well, 2 witnesses is especially helpful when one witness is written down. Sadly, we don't have that. What
oh
we
yeah,
have is the story that me, Uncle Rob, Uncle Chris have been sharing back and forth for years, and a separate story by Uncle Mike, which is slightly different. So,
yeah,
we're not sure if it's 2 events or if just things have been mixed around. But yeah, so let's start with the let's start with a little bit of backstory. You may be aware that every now and then, according to Grandpa Bert, roughly every 20 years or so, ostrich burgers become the new big thing, and everyone tries to make their millions by buying up ostrich and raising them for meat. Now, Grandpa Bert was smart because he knew 2 things. One, it was currently a lull in that market, and 2, ostriches are too scary to raise. So we should start out on something a little bit smaller. In this case, the humble emu. Instead of a 10-foot tall monster that when it kicks you breaks bones, this is a 6-foot tall monster that leaves relatively nasty bruises when it kicks
and
you.
gashes
And
depending
gashes.
on where its toenails hit you.
Yeah. But in most of the experiences we're going to share, most people didn't end up cut. I guess I should
Most.
say, warning ahead for the squeamish. There is a little bit of blood in this story. Sometimes
Yeah.
a lot of blood, depending on how you tell
I would say
it.
all but one was pretty much unscathed
Oh
with
yeah,
the
yeah, by far. So,
the emu being a homely, humble bird from the shores of New Zealand, or is it Australia?
no, cassowaries are New Zealand, emus are Australia,
Oh, got it, got it. Yeah, so
or maybe
they
they're South
just
Africa. Whatever.
I don't
Doesn't
know.
matter. They're one of several large bird types, and the emu is from Australia
Yeah, think dodo but faster.
and
So
taller.
these yeah, these things are ridiculous and true to form. So to give you guys, there's plenty of stories that will go down this with the tales that will regale you with the Spanish fork auction and the random animals that we ended up with. So, as Steven said, Dad was going to make his millions. Grandpa Bert was going to make his millions by raising emus for meat. So, to start that off, he needed obviously a pair of emus. So, we
So
picked up said pair.
yeah. So the way that we transported them, first he found an ad in the paper that said breeding pair of emus $50, and it was too good of a deal to pass up. So he took the all right. We had the big flatbed trailer, which shows up prominently in the story where we move the safe. But oh, we haven't recorded that one yet. We'll record that one in
Nope.
a future episode. And he built walls on it about 3 feet tall, and then on top he laid chain link fence
It
gates.
was it was 4 feet tall. 4 feet
Three,
tall
three or four
fencing.
feet. Well,
Dad didn't cut the OSB.
there
He
was
also did he also didn't use anything other than OSB that has zero structural componentry flexing.
so I don't know how he got them into the cage or into the trailer because I wasn't there for that part. All I
Nope.
know is the ad specified you had to come and pick them up yourself. They would not be delivered. So what I remember the first time seeing these was we were already down at the property. So we leased like 2 acre property from
From the power
like
company.
yeah
So
from the power company. So there were a couple of big old electric pylons for power cables that ran across this property.
yeah, so we were at the end of a dirt lane to paint the picture for everyone. We're at the end of a dirt lane at the bottom of 4th North in West Bountiful. And then down at that bottom corner lot of 2 acres, there was some rubble that had been dumped. There's just kind of some almost rolling divoted hills. And then the two power poles had lines that constantly hummed. So just you could feel yourself getting cancer as you stood underneath them and they just buzzed above you.
So we're out there and we've decided that like the fence. So we have a couple of horses out there at this point. The fence is fine for holding in horses, but we're not sure how it's going to do against emus. So we've built a smaller pen, and we built it probably 15 feet from the corner, and the thing's maybe 40 feet across. Roughly square
I,
shape.
I don't even know if it was 40 feet. It was smaller than that.
It
I
was
feel like it
relatively
was like
so we
20. I think it was like a 20 by 20 square.
that probably is about the size of it. It was far enough back that you could drive past it in both directions, and it halfway covered the 300-gallon water pond that we kept for the horses. So emus had water on one side, horses had water on the other, and we ran this 4 by 4 inch square fencing around this space. There were 2 giant chain link fences. And then to bolster up the strength of the walls, we had taken all of the old Christmas trees from Clem's, this like used food store that we were friends with the owner. We took them away and we just stacked them against the walls of the fences to keep the birds from running into them.
So, just backing up just a little bit, not to correct, but this happened in stages. So, this Franken fence started with 2 panels of chain link, a couple of pallets, and then some of that wire. Oh, no, it wasn't even the wire up
What,
front. We stole that orange construction
like
plastic
netting?
fencing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and wrapped it around everything. And then fearing that that would not work.
Wouldn't hold.
Then those other pieces were added
Yeah, we
to
didn't we
this
didn't know the
fence.
first thing about emus. We didn't really know what to expect. So we had made this really kind of sketchy fence that would probably hold up. Um, and we're down there, and Dad pulls down in the truck, pulls up, stops the truck, and we look at this flatbed trailer, and we're waiting for something to happen. And up from the grate, you see this kind of snake-like head come up, look around, and then go back down. And we're like, well, that's an emu apparently. And we open up the cage to get them into, like, we open up the doors to their pen, and we pull back the door on the trailer, and nothing happens. We all wait, and nothing happens. And finally, we kind of like peek in, and these 2 emus have just sat down, and they're just sort of looking around. They're perfectly content where they are, just sitting in the middle of the trailer.
So
So
as a to defend us a little bit in our lack of research, back in this day, there was no Google. There was no YouTube. You had to go to the library and look through one of those crappy old encyclopedia books. So nobody even knew how to spell emu, let alone when did we look it up.
yeah.
So
Spoiler warning: our neighbor actually had worked with emus and told us like all the tricks of the trade, but that's after the more gory events of this story.
Yes, it's after some failed attempts
Yeah.
on our part.
After a lot of struggling. So,
So looking at these birds, so I remember looking in there and not thinking they were as tall as they were, because when emus sit down, the shag hairy carpet that they look like covers most of their legs, and so you can't see anything. So they just look like this plume, like it looks like something out of a Dr. Seuss book. Like they just, their eyeballs are twice as big as their head, and then their neck is like blue and hairy. Like,
just like a think of like a feather duster that grew legs. That's
yep,
basically what they look like.
a 6 foot tall
So,
feather duster.
so as we're watching, waiting for something to happen, I think its dad ends up climbing in, and I like we just like the trailer starts shaking. You can hear some grumbling and shouting, and eventually one emu poof gets thrown out and kind of stands up indignant and wanders around and sort of walks into its pen, and then poof, the second emu gets thrown out and follows along with the first emu. And we're like, all right, like great. So we close up the gate, and we're like, perfect. We own emus now. And
By gate, he means a pallet.
yeah,
We
this is
close the pallet.
yeah, this is mostly just shoving things in place around them. Well, I gotta say, we did eventually get like 8 foot tall chain link fence panels that we used as gates, and so the gates were
Yes.
really strong. But we throw these birds into the pen, and emus make one of the strangest sounds. It's just this
It's a very deep
like a
thump.
thumping, like low resonant sound, and they kind of make that noise, and they walk to the north end of their pen, and they start pacing back and forth and back and forth, just like it's all they do. And so we put some hay in. We made something like a shelter. I think that we like tied up some like uh like a tarp in case it rained. It turns out emus in all of my sight of them don't do anything about rain, and in fact in snow they just sit down and a little mound of snow will fall over them and they'll just sit there and wait for it to be gone in a lot of cases. So and before you get the wrong idea, Grandpa Bert has gone back to raising emus and ostriches at this point, and as far as I can tell has never had as negative of an experience as we had at the beginning with these.
Oh,
So
yeah, yeah. The emus that we had up front are definitely the dumbest animals that we've ever owned. On top of some of the fairly most ornery, comparatively to most of the mammals or avian variety, we've had some more ornery reptiles. So
yeah, we've had some grumpy ones. So you know they ended up laying a few eggs over like the beginning of that or the end of that summer when we had picked them up. It was
I
like
only
three
remember
of them.
two.
Yeah, it was
I
like
only remember two.
two or three. I think we tried to cook one of them, and I don't know what happened to the other. But they're these very large eggs. They're just dark green. This really wild sight. But we just showed up and there'd just be an egg there. But I think it's the first day that we've put the emus in, the one that we referred to as the male. I'm not sure how we ever distinguished, but it was like the male and female. The male seemed a little bit more, like a little more aggressive, maybe. Like he would definitely come at you a bit more. But we throw him in that pen for the first day, and he starts sprinting to get away, straight towards that fence that's just this 4x4 grating. And he runs, and he gets his head right through one of these holes and runs until his body hits and he gets stuck. And realizing he's stuck, he goes, oh, my head went through a hole. So he brings his head back through a separate hole. And he pulls and he's stuck. And he's like, well, obviously I was better off on the other side. So he turns his head around again. So now there's 3 wires pulling against him and he's gagging himself. So he forces his head back through and put another pallet where he ran into it so that he won't do it again because he just is choking himself. But we get them relatively safe, relatively comfortable, and they're there, and it's all right. Until Uh,
I would say the first couple of weeks there were not incidents.
yeah,
I feel like it was the first couple of weeks. We would go out to the horse pasture because it wasn't next to our house. It was
yeah,
2.5 miles away from our house. And we would go and feed the animals, so the horses and the emus, and fill up their water as needed. And I feel like for the first couple of weeks,
yeah.
emus were boring.
Didn't really have much of an experience with them until one Sunday. I'm sitting in the younger Sunday school class, and Dad comes into the room and goes, "Boy, out here now." And he pulls me out, and everyone else is already outside. It's like me and Nathan were in that class, and I think that he'd already pulled out Rob and Chris. And he brings us out, and he goes, "The emus have escaped. We need to go catch them." And we go, "Yes." And so we all run out to the truck. So we've got, Dad's driving the little white Ford Ranger, and then we've got the big blue Chevy. And we all drive out there in our church clothes. So there's 5 of us out there: Dad, Chris, Robert, me, Nathan, and me. And we've all taken off our ties, and we're in white shirts and slacks. And we get out to the to the
They weren't good looking though.
property.
Don't
No,
like envision that we were poor, really
yeah,
poor back then.
but
So white
which
shirt,
which
quote
also
unquote
means
white shirt.
only pair of church clothes.
Yes, they were our church clothes that we weren't allowed to actually play in or do anything in. We had to play. We
Yeah,
had to change into
you
like normal
yeah.
clothes.
You changed into church clothes right before church. You changed out of church clothes right after church, and you never touched them in between if you could help it.
Unless there's an emu loose,
Yeah.
then we broke that rule.
Then we broke that rule. So we get out there, and so the emus used to pace back and forth on the north end of their pen, and now in our giant 2-acre plot of land, they're now pacing back and forth at the north end of the whole lot. uh,
Like a legged goldfish.
yeah, just nothing going on in their minds. Not really sure why they're drawn to the north, but whatever. But we're watching them, and the problem is most of the fence is all right, but in the northeastern corner where they're kind of hanging around, the whole fence has kind of been smashed down, and there's like a couple of railroad ties in the corner that hold everything up, but it's a real low spot in the
Yeah,
fence.
the horses never bothered it because one of our horses was blind,
Yeah,
and the other one was kind of lame and had like a gimpy front legs, so they never messed with that
yeah,
area.
they were pretty content. We fed them, and they would just hang out. So we get out there, and they're just walking back and forth, and so we start off with Chris chasing the emus. And we get out there, and all of us are running, and really it turns into Chris and Dad doing their best to chase the emus. And Chris does all right, but the land speed of a human, like Usain Bolt levels, which is like currently the fastest man alive, he gets like maybe 13 miles an hour, and emus run something like 30 to 40 miles per hour. So they just kind of jog away from him. And we kind of run back and forth, and there's not a lot of luck. And then we stop. Everyone's getting kind of tired, and we go, all right, we can't outrun the birds, but we can outthink the birds. So Dad organizes us into a line, and we all stand.
Spoiler alert, we can't.
With our arms stretched so that we're standing fingertip to fingertip, and it's like Dad against the fence, then Chris, then Rob, then Nathan, then me.
Hold on. We started out not fingertip to fingertip because Spud's missing a couple of the times where we walked in close and we were close together, but there was probably 2 or 3 feet because this is a 2-acre lot, right?
Yeah.
And it's just a giant square. And so we've got our arms out, and then we've got like 3 or 4 bodies in between us that are open. And as we get closer to the birds and try to shrink, they just sprint in between us.
Yeah, they just run right between us. It doesn't work. Like they keep running past us.
So then we start outthinking the birds.
Yeah. So we tighten up our formation, and we walk, and we're doing good, because as we walk towards the emus, they walk away from us. And because they seem to be glued to this like northern fence, we just stay against the fence, and we walk along, and everything's going fine. We turn the corner, and we're pushing them up, and about halfway up the fence that we're pushing up, we're almost to their pen. About halfway, there's kind of this little divot where there's sort of a dry riverbed through the or dry stream bed through the property.
It's like a drainage when it gets really wet out
Yeah.
there.
So right about there, I don't know if it was one of them or both of them, but they seem to suddenly realize what it is we're trying to do. And faster than you can imagine, they go from just like ambling along, they turn and they bolt straight at us. And
It was just one of them.
Everybody scatters the moment it starts running at us because, again, we don't know anything about these animals. And so we all run. And Dad's yelling at us to stay in place and to hold the line. And they just run past us. It's like, all right.
Yeah. So you have Dad who's reenacting Braveheart, telling us to hold the line. And then you have the rest of us that are having vivid images of Jurassic Park and those velociraptor coming at you.
Right at you. So we reform the line. We walk again. We get around the corner. We get up to that corner, but we've reorganized the line. Now it's Chris against the fence, and then Dad, and then Robert, Nathan, and me. And the emus run at us, and one of them runs for the three younger of us, and we break and flee immediately. But one charges straight at Chris, and Chris now has a decision to make. Is he more scared of the emu charging him, or a Dad next to him yelling at him to hold still?
So to aid Chris in his decision-making paradigm, Dad is already screaming at me, Nathan, and Spud
for running away. And so that emu charges straight at him, and Chris goes, and holds out a hand and tries to block himself, and that emu runs right into him, and it falls over. Because it turns out emus are like 30 pounds. And Chris is like 150.
Chris is 150 now. Chris was 70 pounds back then.
Well, he outweighed the emu.
Due to the physical principle of where the center of gravity is on the bird, because its neck is 3.5 feet long, and its legs are 2.5 feet long, and the only weight it has is in its drumsticks, right? If you can imagine this overgrown, stretched out chicken. So as it comes at Chris and his eyes closed and putting his hand out the best he can to defend himself, as any teenager probably would,
the charging emu.
It runs into him, and its legs just shoot out from underneath it. It flips over and hits the ground. It scrambles up and runs away.
Yeah, the fun thing about an emu on the ground is when they hit the ground, their feet are sticking up, and so is their head, and they have this kind of confused and almost offended look on their face before they realize, I should still be running, and they stand up and run away.
I think it's because they look at their feet as another bird, and they're like, "What are you doing here? What are you looking at?
Guys doing here?" So Dad decides this isn't working. We need to change tactics. And so instead of trying to push them all the way up, what we're going to do is we're going to push them into the corner of the fence, and we're going to grab them. So this is the new plan. We start out the same way, arms out. We start pushing them.
Is this the other time? Because I remember us. Obviously there's spoilers ahead here, but I remember Dad getting danced on by the emus when he was going to do a blood draw.
Yeah, this is all that same event. We learned a lot in this one. There's a lot of progression.
No, because we did the one at church where we got them back in, and then we had to go and try to do this again. And the second time we brought a rope. This wasn't the rope time. We got them back in their pen without touching them on the first one.
I don't think so. Because we tried holding a rope between us, but the emus would just run into it and their heads would flop over as they like clothesline themselves, and they just keep running because they don't think with their brains. That's just there for vision, basically.
Right,
but no, this is
it's just automatic responses. But I remember our time Dad getting danced on, he wasn't in church clothes. He was in a white polo, and I was in school clothes, which for those that are listening, were very different than church clothes because they had holes in them and stains.
So I remember this all as a single event. This was one single progressive learning event where we went from trying to push them to trying to corner them to eventually Dad getting danced on.
Oh, we did both, but yeah, we got them back in their pen without touching them the first time, from what I remember. But we could say it as a single event, and it'll make us sound better because the emus definitely got out a number of
Yeah,
times,
they got
and
out. They got
every
out
single
several times.
time we
Later,
would do the same progression to get them back in.
later times we did have better luck with different approaches. But we'll get to some of the other approaches later. We we push him into the corner, and one of those emus runs into the fence and flops over it and has escaped. Like it's
Out of our
now
property.
out of our property, and I'm pretty sure there are no fences between it and the rest of the world anymore. Like it's not like it got into someone else's field. And so Chris Chris and Nathan jump the fence and start running, and Nathan gets a little ways out, and Chris, like that emu's not trying real hard to get away, but Chris circles out around it, and he's able to kind of herd it back, and it starts running away from him and hits that fence again and just flops back over it. So then we're pulling the fence back up and trying to get it so they can't fall out through that corner. But we get into so we fix the fence. We figured out our move. We're all standing in line. We walk towards them, and as we get close, Dad breaks away and he jumps onto the back of one of the birds, and he's holding it, and its head is sticking up next to him, and he's like, "All right, you guys help me guide the bird back." And we all kind of stand around with our hands out, going, "Yeah, we're helping." we're walking along. It's like, all right, all this is going well, and we get to that same ravine where they freaked out last time, and that bird starts fighting and struggling, and Dad's holding on to it, but it gets like it's throwing him off balance, and he falls over, but he doesn't let go.
It was slow motion. He picked up the bird, and it was like a body slam motion from WWE, but not like measured out. Like he didn't know where the ground was. He didn't know what he was falling on, but he just fell backwards with bird in arms and hits the ground. And as Steven stated before, when the bird hits the ground, its legs are pointed up and its head is pointed up, and it just has a moment of confusion where it does nothing.
Yeah, so it just sits there, kind of stunned, like the rest of us, and then it does what comes natural. It flips over and stands up, breaking Dad's grip or wiggling out of it, and then it kind of tap dances on him for a little bit and runs in circles, and then runs away. And all of us are just staring at this wide-eyed, like, and Dad gets up, sputtering and dusty, and he's yelling at, "Why didn't you grab the bird?" And we're all looking at it going like, "That bird took you out. How are we supposed to grab him?"
Meanwhile, Dad is like 4 times the size of us at this age. So there's no way any of us are like, well, if it beat up Dad, we're not going to freaking get in there.
So the Dad's like, "All right, we're doing it again." And we do the same thing. Hands out, walk him into the corner. Dad jumps on him. We go walking. But again, we've learned from the mistakes of the past, and this time, just before he gets to that point, Dad, instead of just holding him, leans his weight on him, and that bird's legs start to bend underneath it and shake. And Dad, slow walks this thing all
30
the way
pound,
there.
Yeah, this 30-pound bird has a 270-pound man on his back.
Just walking him up there, and we get up, and the gate is on the south side of the pen. So for those of you following along, that's the farthest possible side on the pen that the gate can be. Walks him around, and he throws that bird in, and it goes fine. It lands in there. We go, great. We got this.
It goes to the north wall and
goes
begins
to the north
pacing.
wall, starts pacing back and forth. Again, emus aren't super bright. So
because we didn't do anything to the fence at that point.
Yeah, so we're like, all right, brilliant. We know how to catch emus. It just takes 5 of us. We're rock stars. We're gonna do this. And so we go out there. We get in a line. We walk that emu into the corner. Dad jumps on it. We go walking up, and this time the emu doesn't freak out. And we're like, oh, perfect. Like, it realizes that its friend's already in the cage. It wants to join its friend. Everything's good. And so Dad's walking it, and he gets all the way up around the corner just before the gate, and that bird starts fighting him again. And again, learning from mistakes, he doesn't fall over backwards with it. He throws it against the outer fence of the property and dives in, and he grabs one of its legs with both of his hands, and that other leg is going kicking away next to him, and he's holding it. He's like, grab on, help me. And Chris is watching it, and he's looking at that leg go back and forth, and he grabs it, but with only one hand, and so it's still kicking around really fast.
Yeah. Mind you, although only 30 pounds, all of its muscle is in its legs.
All of its muscle, it's 30 pounds of leg muscle. And so it's kicking around, and Chris is kind of throwing off its kick a little bit, and as they're trying to kind of get control of it, that kick comes out, and it comes in and hits Grandpa Bert in the side of the face. And according to Chris, that's when time froze. And Grandpa Bert, holding onto that bird, went and stood up, and he threw that bird 15 feet into its pen through the open gate.
By the leg.
And slams the gate shut. May or may not have hit Chris at the same time. But we're all like, oh, great. We did it. We beat the emus. And we're all pretty proud of ourselves. And then we realize the dad is still yelling. And he's still mad at something. And we look over, and there he is. When the emu kicked him, it split his ear in half, sideways. And so
I remember being underneath.
So Dad said that the scar goes what is this?
Lateral?
Lateral through the ear? Like it's parallel with his eyes is the cut that he refers to.
Anyway, there was a lot of blood. Turns out ears bleed a lot.
All down his shirt, all down his neck. And he's wearing, well, as I remember it, he's wearing his church shirt.
It's white polo.
And he goes,
it could have been the same thing.
Could have been. Like, honestly. So he goes, Jack, this is my only good shirt, and I have to go to work because he's going to do insurance measurements. So he like draws blood and asks people questions and things like that. And he looks at us, he's like, you wait here for your mother. And he jumps in the truck and he drives home. And all of us kind of wait. We go, well, Mom found out that the birds were out when she was on her way to work. And that was like 2 hours ago. Like, she's not coming back anytime soon. So we all jump in the other truck.
She's a 10-hour shift.
Yeah, she's going to be gone all day. So we drive home, and by then, you know, Dad's pretty well taking care of himself. He's no longer bleeding because he's taken one standard Band-Aid and stuck his ear back together with it. He's wearing his second nicest shirt, which I think was like a teal shirt with, as I recall, a strap of like something that reminded me of like was it like truck seating? It had interesting vertical stripes. But we get home and he goes, all right, Chris, it's your fault I got kicked in the face. You have to come with me to work. And Chris is like, all right, whatever. And so he jumps in the truck and they drive down, and it's like a 20-minute drive to get to the place. And they pull up and they're knocking on the door. The guy's not answering. And as they're leaving, the guy comes out the side door of his house. And they turn around, and Dad's like, oh, hey. He's like, we had an appointment. You might have forgotten about it. And the guy looks at him and goes, oh, my gosh, are you okay? And he's like, oh, it's fine. And then he looks, and he's bleeding all over his shirt again because that Band-Aid has fallen off and the wound is reopened.
The Band-Aid soaked up as much blood as it possibly could and then slumped off his ear. But it's on his left side, and Chris, who is sitting in the passenger side, could not see it.
Yeah, all the way over there. So Dad, like, he's like, oh, and he's like, oh, I'm dripping blood on your driveway. So he jumps over into the guy's grass. The guy's like, oh, like, do I need to call like an ambulance for you or something? He's like, no, that's fine. He's like, we can just get started on the paperwork out here. And he pulls out his clipboard and starts working on this guy's insurance information.
Bleeding all over his lawn.
Yeah. So that's the story as I recall it. Now, we may need to re-record maybe Rob's version of it. We definitely need to record Mike's version of it, which only involves one emu and it being at our house. But I'm interested to know what the versions of this story are. I think that the broad strokes all are consistent. Dad definitely got kicked in the ear by an emu, and we definitely learned to start catching the emus better over time.
I'm going to say no on that second part. We never got good at catching the emus.
Later on, I think it might have been on your mission, an emu got out, and me, Mom, and Nathan went out there with like a cardboard box that was like 6 feet tall and 2 foot by 2 foot. And we walked out there and walked an emu into the corner, and we just set the box over the top of the emu. And then you grab the box and you start walking, and the emu follows without fighting. Because it turns out emus aren't super bright, so if you can just cover their eyes with anything, they'll follow. You just grab them by their tiny little dwarfy wings, and you can just guide them anywhere. Like, they'll walk off a cliff for you if you're holding them by the wings. So it turns out there were these really easy ways to deal with them. And Dad, who, as I recall, wore 2 Band-Aids for a long time to keep his ear in place after this, he met up with our neighbor, who it turns out had worked with emus significantly because he worked at Hogle Zoo. And he's like, emus are a cinch. You just cover their eyes with like a shirt. They're the easiest birds. It's like
Frats. Yeah, so these stupid birds, we didn't learn very quickly. I know that Steven's telling the story like it was this magical, like, there were hours of us fighting with those stupid birds in that pasture.
Oh yeah, this is definitely the abbreviated, more fun to listen to version of the story. There were a lot of tears shed over this event.
Yep. Sadly, one of the emus, although he did it before, put his head through the fence and then got spooked and hung himself.
Did that in the middle of the night, so we found him the next day. So our breeding pair became a, egg-bound solo, and she just sort of wandered back and forth on the north side of the pen for the rest of her days as well.
So she got out.
Yeah, but we don't have enough time to discuss her untimely end.
All right, there's the emu story.
Yep. So be grateful for Google and all the useful information about emu husbandry that it offers.
Talk to your neighbor. But we can't be heard on our video recording. Perfect. Now I just got to figure out you.
Now they have me. Great. Okay, we're both in there. And now video. Great.